All right, guys. Super excited to talk about the year-end review.
What? It's not year-end review. It's year-in review.
No, it's not. It's the end of the year. We do the year-end review.
We're not reviewing the end of the year. We're reviewing the whole year. So it's the year-in review.
No. It's at the end of the year is when we do it for the next year. It's the year-end review.
No, it's always been the year-in review. Okay, let's get into that.
Hey, everybody. I'm Nate.
I'm Andrea.
And you have caught us for Marriage Monday here on the Marriage by Design channel. This month, we're super excited to talk about all things year-end or year-in review. So this is something we've talked about on previous videos this year. About the end of every year, we do an end of the year review.
We're reviewing the year.
Where we're reviewing
our year in review.
That's right. Really funny. We've never really had this conversation until very recently as we were talking about doing these videos. And I had typed out an outline of what we wanted to talk about. It said year-end review. And Andrea goes, isn't it year-end review? And obviously she's wrong, and that's silly.
That's so funny.
So this is the process that we go through every year. We had some mentors in our life that have really encouraged us to do this because this whole thing is based on the idea that you can't know where you're going if you don't set a course.
Right.
If you're just wandering around, right? I mean, try that, right? Get in a ship, right, off in Florida and just go to England. Don't worry about any planning, just go, right? And see where you end up, right? I mean, that's the idea, but yet so many of us, that's how we run our marriage and our family is we're just like, well, we're living the American dream, right? Hope we can retire. Well, what's your plan for retirement? Hope we can retire, right? I mean, that's
living on a hope and a dream.
Exactly right. We really want to get a bigger house. Well, what's the plan for that? We really want to get a bigger house. I think I'll probably become CEO of my company. Oh, well, that's great. Are you on the? Well, no. I'm just hoping that'll happen. Right. I mean, these are things that we do as people. Can we not good at planning, and then we're really frustrated when we don't reach those goals. Same thing happens in the marriage and in the family. If we're not really scripted and planned out on where we want our family to go, it's not reasonable to think that we're going to get there. Right. At least not efficiently. Right.
Yep.
So, the end of every year, we go through a process where we take a look at our family from a financial standpoint, from a time management standpoint, from a just generally where are we at as a family the end of this year versus the beginning of the year. And we talk about what things need to change, right? What things did we do really well this year? What things did we do really poorly? How do those things need to change? That's going to be the process we're going to share with you all over the next 4 weeks. We're going to talk about how do we even do that, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that today when we talk about the review part of this process, right? Looking at the previous year, what does that look like? We're going to talk about setting goals for next year, right? So that would be the flip side of this. How do we prepare for next year in a way that we can measure and find out if we met our goals there or not? Yeah. Then we're going to talk specifically about finances and time, because those we find are the biggest things that trip folks up as we do this, sort of process. So probably the best place to start is to just ask the question, why even do this at all?
Mm-hmm. Well, first it's great to just talk about your year and talk about what did we do really well? What were some areas that we didn't do really well?
Sure.
What are the goals that we met or didn't meet? And just kind of being able to talk about what went well and what didn't, and being able to connect on those kinds of things. And maybe there's something that I feel like, oh, this did not go well, and you're like, I didn't feel like that at all, Sure. And so then it's an opportunity for you both to understand each other better.
Sure.
In that way. But always, if you're doing these end of year
planning,
and goal setting and all that sort of thing, then the next year you should have gotten somewhere, taken a step forward in your
maybe
goals
not in
as
all
a
of
family.
those areas,
Right.
but in some of them,
Right.
for sure. Yeah, so maybe this is your first. Maybe the end of this year is going to be your first time doing sort of an end of year planning. So a big part for us is going back and looking at what did we write down, what did we say were going to be our goals for this year. Obviously, you won't have that if this is your first time doing it, but still going back and reviewing the year.
Yep.
is an important part. And why is that? Well, because in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you've been.
Right.
And that's why any end of year planning, if it's only forward focused, that's only half the equation. Another big part of that is, well, let's take a look at where have we been this year? Mm-hmm. What were our highs and lows? How do we manage our finances? How do we manage our family? Because that's where you decide, okay, do we need to tweak the trajectory of this family? Do we need to change the direction that we're headed? Maybe in small areas in some ways, maybe in really large areas in some ways.
Sure.
That's really what this video today is all about, is talking about what does that review piece of this equation look like. So the question is, where do you start when you do this? Well,
yeah,
for us, there's a couple of things that we want to get straight up front. And that is, I recommend that you always do two things. Set the parameter of the conversation, right? Meaning, this is an intentional conversation that you and I have, right? It's not like, hey, we're hanging out, we're watching a movie, and all of a sudden we go, let's talk about what our year looked like this year, right? This is an intentional time. We do a lot of times where we're hanging out on the couch and we're just talking about the year, our family, or each other, or whatever.
But we take intentional time set aside to do this year in review, and we know what we're talking about, and we have some information that we need to bring to the table. Right.
Distraction-free time.
Yep.
And really just set the parameters of here's what we want to talk about, right? We want to talk... you may not be agenda people where you like to have like a laid out nice agenda, but I think it's really helpful for this conversation. And here's why. This conversation has some emotion built into it, right? Sure. Because you're going to be honest about things you've done well, things you didn't do well. And it can be really easy for this conversation to get off in the woods if it's not a really structured conversation. We're going to talk about this, then we're going to talk about this, then we're going to talk about this.
And this, too, doesn't have to be just one time. If it's better for you guys to have this over three separate...
Oh, totally.
Three separate meetings,
totally.
Then do that. We frequently will have this conversation over more than just one time because it can last for a long time.
Yeah, a weekend, a couple weekends.
Yep.
Totally. Yeah, that's totally right. So here's the second piece. So one is set the parameters of the conversation. Make sure you're both clear. This is when we're having it. This is, what we're going to talk about as far as let's go back and look at the year. And again, we're separating this into two pieces. The reviewing the current year, or the year that's just passed, and then planning for the new year. We're talking about that review piece. And we separate those out specifically as we talk about them. We have a set conversation reviewing the year that's coming to a close, and a set conversation planning for the next year. And those two conversations do not bleed over into one another. Now, there are goals that we set from the review piece for the following year, but it's not. We're not going back. Right, when we're doing future planning, we're not going back and going, well, let's go back and talk about this year in review. So, one is set the parameters. Two is, this is important, leave the inner defense attorney out of it.
I didn't go to law school.
We all have that little defense attorney inside of us where whenever somebody says something that might be critical of you, that defense attorney pops up and makes you want to defend yourself. And there's a place for that. But this conversation's generally not one of them. Now, that also means you need to put away your inner prosecuting attorney as well, right? This is not a conversation. Now, look, you may have to have hard conversations about, look at this spending we're doing is out of control. and it's got to stop. Or, this way we're managing our time is not honoring to the Lord, and that needs to change. Yep. I mean, those types of things are great conversations to have, but you have to come at this with we are in this together.
Yes.
And if Andrea is failing in one area of this marriage, whatever it is, financially or whatever, we're both failing. Mm-hmm. And so, you've got to come at it with that togetherness mentality. And it can really, it makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And so you got to leave that inner defense attorney out of it. Just as a tip, like a real life tip.
I do. Give me something practical.
Plan out this conversation for a time right after you've had sex.
Oh boy.
Honestly.
Nathan wants every conversation to be after sex.
Right. That's right. But and joking aside, that's true. But joking aside, seriously, the conversations that the endorphins are going, you're feeling literally as together as you feel in that moment.
Right.
And that's a great way to kick off these conversations, and I'm not above saying it. Right? That's a great way to come together as a couple and be on the same page to make these conversations easier.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true.
So, set parameters for the conversation. Leave your inner defense attorney out of it. So here's the first thing you got to do. You got to gather the information, right? And here's what
information?
Here's what I mean by that mainly, because it varies depending on the things that you're going to talk about, right? But what doesn't work for this conversation when you're reviewing a year is, well, I feel like you spent too much money on groceries this year.
What?
Right. Or, whatever. I feel like your hobby is just running this family into the ground. Or I feel like we need to change churches. Right? I don't want to make this all about financial stuff because it's not just about that. Mm-hmm. I feel like our kids are out of control. I feel like you yell at our kids too much. We don't want this conversation to be all about what you feel. Right? Because feelings are slippery. Right? They change dramatically.
Sure.
And we can be fooled by our own blind spots, by our own biases, by our own preconceived notions of what we want out of our marriage. So what I tell people is start with two places. Start with your bank account and your calendar. Mm-hmm. Those are really good places to start this conversation. And if you do not keep track of the money that's coming into and going out of your bank account, you got to start that right now.
Yeah.
Your money's coming in and going out of your bank account, whether you direct it or not. Your job is to take control of that bank account and make sure that your money's only going to places you're directing it to go.
Yeah, and that might sound silly. Like, I'm the one spending my money, so I'm directing it. Well, the reality is, if you don't plan for how you're going to spend your money, then you will be surprised.
Yeah, no doubt.
You will be so surprised about where that money goes, and you'll get to you could probably get to the end of the month and be like, how did we spend this much money?
Right.
It just happens if you don't really plan it and be intentional.
Totally. Yeah, so really important, right? You've got to be, it doesn't have to necessarily be daily, but if you use Quicken, that's what we use, and I've really loved Quicken. It costs $70 or $80 a year, but then I can get on and classify all of our transactions. It connects right with our banks and credit cards and all that stuff, loans and all that, and I can see exactly where we're at any given time with regards to all these different budgeted items.
Yeah, and there's lots of budgeting.
Tons
there's
of them.
Dave Ramsey's Every Dollar.
Yep.
There's quite a few programs out there that you can use.
Totally. But you've got to have one, right? That's step one, because otherwise, you've just turned what can be a 3-hour conversation into a 20-hour conversation because you're on the fly trying to go back and look at, where did our money go?
Sure.
So gather up that stuff first, right? Gather up your bank statements, your Quicken, spit outs, or Dave Ramsey
your
stuff,
calendar
and calendar too. I mean, if you don't have a family calendar, I would highly recommend that. Right below having a money management software, I would recommend have a joint calendar, and you get Gmail, right? Get a Google Calendar, and put stuff on that for the two of you so that you can see where are we spending our time. And I would encourage you to put not just stuff that affects one another, but put even things on there like went to the zoo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or things like that. And we don't even necessarily aren't as good about doing that, but it'd be really helpful, because then when you sit down as a family and you go, well, okay, should we get a zoo membership for next year? Well, I don't feel like we used it that much. Well, did you or didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
It gives you an opportunity to be able to go back and look at that.
Sure.
Also gives you an opportunity to go back and look at how much time did we spend serving other people? How much time did we spend getting together with friends? It's a barometer of your time.
How much time did we spend doing the things that we say are important to us?
Exactly right.
Did that actually pan out? Did we schedule that into our calendars?
Right. And if we said that, raising our kids with an understanding of serving in the community is really important, and over the course of the last 12 months we did 2 things as a family to serve in the community, it's hard to say that that's a goal that was accomplished.
Right.
Because 2 times over the course of a year probably doesn't tell your kids that that's really important.
Right.
Right. And that's just an example off the top of my head. I mean, it could be whatever, thing that you plan for. So start with your bank account, start with your calendar, right? Beyond that, then, taking inventory of things like, where are we at as a couple spiritually, right? Are we plugged in to a local church where we can be worshiping with other people that can encourage us, that can hold us accountable, that can push us together as a couple, or and push us up as a family?
And Bible studies, and are we doing our own individual daily devotions? And
right, are we doing something as a family to pass that down to our kids? Because you might be doing devotions individually as a couple, but man, if your kids aren't seeing that, it's like it doesn't exist to them, right? I mean, I think it's really important. Look, we don't want to be showy or hypocritical, right? We don't want to act like we're all deep in the word if we're not.
Of course.
But allowing your kids to see you in your quiet time, I think that's a really important thing for kids. So it's an opportunity to review each of those things and figure out, okay, where are we at with those things?
Yeah.
Along with that is having hard data, right? That's kind of the same thing as that, but not just, again, you want to get away from how you feel like the last year went and get down to, here's the measurable things that we can look at with regards to our family. That doesn't mean that feelings don't play a part of it, right? Because you may sit down and go, man, I just have felt so stressed this year, right? I mean, that's a feeling. But then being able to dig down deeper into that, and why is that?
Right.
I mean, what is it? What's measurable beneath that? Are we involved in too much? Is it financial issues? Is it that the Lord's doing something in your heart and you just have unrest with regards to that, or what is it?
In regards to hard data too, it's good if you have a goal like something like ours where we want to eat dinner together as a family a minimum of 4 nights a week, and not have other things going on, but doing that. And if you know that at the end of the year, we're going to be having this year in review, then the weeks that we're not doing that, maybe I have somewhere that I'm going to make a note of, we didn't do it, this week, whatever week it was. And then we can go back at the end of the year and say, okay, there were 3 weeks out of the whole year that we didn't do that. We're okay with that.
Yeah.
Or, oh my gosh, there were 20 weeks out of the whole year that we didn't do that. What was going on those 20 weeks? Are those really important? Are those things that's keeping us from having family dinners important enough? Should we keep that in our schedule? If not, then we need to really, pare down.
Right.
Yeah, so if you're doing the year in review, then you have some data throughout the year that you can kind of be collecting or just writing down so that at the end of the year you know what to look for.
Right, exactly. So this is exactly the time where you're going to spend time as a couple talking through each one of these things, right? And I would make just like take a notebook and divide it into sections and go through them in whatever order you guys have decided you want to do with regards to this conversation. But finances, time, spirituality, parenting, any other major ones that we talk about that should go on there. Individual, like connecting with other guys and girls, right,
Yeah,
outside of the home. That's important.
Yep.
You know, marriage or relationships outside the home. And another one that we talked about, that we talked about on Friday, Family Friday, is protecting your rest.
Mm-hmm.
How have we done about protecting our rest? Those 7 things,
Yep.
I would make note of and go through each one. Right, when you talk about finances, you know, get into the budget, and that means if you've had a budget for that year, how did we line up on that? If you didn't, what's realistic to think about with regards to a budget? Because that conversation where you're looking at your finances from the year that's ending is going to lead directly to your conversation about planning for the year ahead.
Yep.
And we'll talk about budgets and all that in way more detail when we talk about finances. Time, same thing. So when we talk about time, we're talking about boulders, pebbles, and sand.
Yep.
And we'll get into that when we talk about time, so I won't spend a lot of time on it here. But, you know, spirituality, I think you and I went through and did a couple of goals that we had for that coming year that were stated goals, that were measurable goals.
Sure.
And, you know, not things like I just want to feel closer to God next year. But, you know, I want to, you know, for me, I think one of them one year was I want to spend more time silent before the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Like just doing nothing, sitting and listening.
Yeah, and for this year, one of mine was to really understand more about prayer, learn more about prayer. I don't remember the exact right offhand the exact things, but it was just understand more about prayer and different kinds of prayer and what God has to say about prayer in the Bible, and so that was one of my goals that we'll be talking about in a couple weeks.
That's great, and that also leads to this is an opportunity. First of all, once you have set the parameters for the conversation, take time ahead of time to really dig into these things. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to feel totally put on the spot if you wait until the night you're having the conversation to start thinking about, man, spiritually, what's my journey been this year?
Yes.
So take that time ahead of time to think about that. Same with, you know, any of these, you know, other than finances and time where you're going to see what you did. You know, the rest of these things, taking real time to sit and meditate on these things before the Lord and think about them, really important. Parenting, got to be honest, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, that's kind of, I think, how we kind of tend to like to do it is what do we feel like, man, we really did a great job with raising our kids in this area this year, and what things do we need to work on?
Yep.
And then a plan for how are we going to work on those things.
Right. Yep.
You know, same thing that, you know, that goes right into protecting our rest, you know, how we do with that. And, you know, the other things, you know, that we talked about as well. I mean, it becomes you know, let's celebrate, as you mentioned, I think last week or the week before, about setting up altars and really celebrating the victories that the Lord delivers to us.
Yes.
Let's celebrate those this end of year. So it's not meant to be a bad conversation.
No,
Let's
can be a lot of
them.
fun.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And talking too about the growth that we've seen in our kids throughout the year.
Totally.
That's always a fun thing too. Talking about the growth that we've had in our own personal lives, the growth that we've had, the growth that Nathan's had in business and what he's learned and how the business has grown. We talk about those things too.
Yeah, I mean, this turns into a really cool time of sort of dreaming together, right? I mean, as we make the transition from the end of the year review of, you know, that review of the year that just happened into planning for the future. It's not just planning for that one year. It's a chance to revisit our dreams as a couple and individually and for our family. And
and how are we doing on those dreams and goals? And are we inching closer to this?
Right. What are the dreams and goals we're seeing developing in our kids, and how can we pour into those things? Or if they're dreams that are concerning, how do we redirect them towards, you know, something else if those aren't God-honoring behaviors that they're showing interest in? So I mean, that's kind of what our end of the year review looks like. It's a lot of
review.
It's a lot of gathering information, taking a look at it, making sure we're on the same page, being transparent, and talking about how you feel, about how, the year went, even outside of those things where it's not about feelings, it's about the numbers. But, spirituality, parenting, protecting your rest, all of these things that can be things where we don't necessarily want to talk about them because it's easy to be critical of ourselves. It's easy to be critical of each other. But it's really important to take that time to be honest with one another about where we feel. And you know what? Maybe you need to set as part of your parameters that, hey, I'm not going to say things that I think you're struggling with in parenting. We're going to keep, maybe you're not at that place right now in your marriage where you've built up that trust and that comfort to be able to point out things about each other. Mm-hmm. So maybe commit to, hey, I'm going to tattle on myself and share openly and honestly with you about my shortcomings. Mm-hmm. And as you grow in that and as you get into a habit of doing this, that comfortability to be able to say, hey, here's some things I've seen that are concerning, that I've seen from you, will come with it.
Yep,
that's right. Anything else, baby?
No, it's a big undertaking, but it is so worth it.
So worth it.
And it's a lot of fun, and it really helps to set up our next year hopefully for success, but to always be inching towards those, those short-term, long-term goals that we've got.
That's right. So I hope you, listening to this, I hope you took away a few things that you can incorporate as we come up on the end of the year this year. I hope that you and your spouse commit to sitting down and planning for next year. And in order to plan for next year, you got to review this year. And this doesn't just apply, obviously, to couples that are married, right? I mean, if you're a single parent, you can do this same thing, right? There will be considerably less defense attorney opportunities because you will only be arguing with yourself.
Sure.
But you can still be honest with yourself before the Holy Spirit about what you've been through this year, where you fell short, where you need to celebrate, and plan to go into next year strong. And that's exactly what we will be talking about a week from today. On Marriage Monday, we'll be talking about the planning piece. How do we set goals and plan for next year? So we hope to see you guys there. Until then, remember we've got Family Friday coming up this Friday. We will continue to talk all things Christmas. And then we will be live at 8:30 on Sunday evening. Love to have you on to chat with us at that point.
Yeah, great. Thanks for joining us.
And remember, God is for your marriage.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Marriage by Design. If you were impacted by this video, like it by hitting the thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and once you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified when new episodes release.
Excellent. Also, one of the huge pillars of our show is interactivity between us and you. So we would love you to comment down in the comments below if you have thoughts about this video, or if you have questions or other things you'd like to see considered in the future. In addition, if you'd like, you can email us. That's marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @marriagebydesignpodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching Marriage by Design Podcast. Finally, if you want to, you can tweet at us. We do have a Twitter account that is @MarriageXDesign. Thanks, and have a great day.